Go.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's the Rob and Mike Show. I am Rob.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike.
And today's topic, we're going to be talking about invisible disabilities. And just like the term implies, disabilities that you would not necessarily know were there. Okay. It's easy to see that someone has a disability if you see a wheelchair, or you see a cane, or you see someone communicating through sign language, things of that nature. But there are a lot of disabilities that we don't necessarily know are there until the person tells us. You can look at learning disabilities. Okay, that's an excellent one, because history is strewn with examples of people who were held back in school or labeled retarded, okay? And really they just had a learning disability like dyslexia, where if it had been given attention to, okay, they would not have had the trouble they had, okay? One reason this is a problem, and a reason that it's our topic today, is because even today in 2022, okay, society still has a lot of stereotypes about what is a disability, or is it really a disability because I can't see it. Okay, you look at things like anxiety, depression, schizophrenia. A lot of people with schizophrenia are still seen as dangerous or violent, and really they're not. Or if you have depression, just get over it, man. Keep up a stiff upper lip, or anxiety. Anxiety, people want to say, well, everybody has anxiety. Well, that's true. But when it gets to a point where it interferes with the happiness or the daily activities of life, that's right, that's when it becomes a problem.
Right. I think a disability, generally speaking, is something that is going to interfere with a daily activity, some form of daily activity. I mean, here we are, we both are sitting in wheelchairs. We're not walking.
Right.
The mobility is a daily activity for everybody, and ours is impeded. I think with the invisible disability, a lot of people don't really recognize that. When you think about going to a store, going to the mall, you see a handicapped parking spot.
Right.
What's on it?
A wheelchair.
A wheelchair
That's
is
right.
on it.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people think, oh, if you're in a wheelchair, you have a disability. But like Rob said, I mean, there's so many other disabilities. I remember going to the mall. I was talking to Rob earlier, and to the mall or a store or wherever I was, Wegmans maybe. And I saw somebody get out of their car and walk in. They parked in the handicap spot and walked right in the store. When I first got injured, I was so mad at that because I didn't understand. I didn't realize it. And I think as I've gotten older and wiser and more knowledgeable about what other things are disabilities, hidden disabilities in this case, you accept that for what it is. I mean, people have. I mean, think about it. There's a very high percentage of people who have some form of disability in our country, and most of them are hidden.
That's right. I used to be a reporter for a website. Unfortunately, it went out of business, but it was called halftheplanet.com. In other words, half the planet has some type of disability.
Right.
And that's true. And talking about what you were saying about the handicap spots, and I hate the word handicap, I want to say accessible spots, okay?
That's true.
But I used to think right away, well, that person is using somebody else's placard that has a disability.
I thought that all the time.
That's the first thing I would always think of.
I'd be fuming.
That's right.
I know, and I'm sure there are plenty of times I said things that I should not have to people who got out of their vehicles.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I was never confronted by them.
Yeah. I mean, it could be somebody who has MS, but you don't really see a lot of symptoms or anything, but they have trouble walking long distances, things of that nature.
Right.
Sure.
And I think the biggest invisible disability nowadays is probably autism.
Sure.
I mean, there are so many, you see the commercials, over the course of my lifetime, the last 25, 30 years, I've seen that number come down where it says 1 in 123 people
Right.
have autism.
Right.
Now it's something like 1 in 53.
It's like 1 in 53,
Right,
something like that.
I don't know the exact number, but it's something like that. So a lot of people, and you would never know. I mean, because we have supports coordination for autism, adult autism here at CRI. There are other agencies all throughout the city, the state, the country,
Sure.
that help people with autism and other people with all disabilities to remain independent. So a lot of times, I mean, it's something like we're talking about, it's invisible because, the supports and services that are out there for people with disabilities really allows them to assimilate into society.
Sure.
And do the things that that everybody else does.
Well, I'm the board president for Kaleidoscope,
There you go.
and we provide services for people who are on the autism spectrum, right? And I hear all kinds of stories all the time about how, autism is still so misunderstood.
Mhm.
It's incredible. I was a student at Edinburgh University, and I have an anxiety disorder myself, full disclosure, and that's why I don't drive. And when I worked for the Office of Students with Disabilities, I was, whatever word to use, I was harassed about the fact that I didn't drive. And it's not like I was asking people for rides to and from work. I took a bus,
Mhm.
okay, from my home to EUP and then back. But they felt a need to, well, why don't you drive? And this and that. You'd be so much more independent. And well, these are professionals who are in the world of disability and dealing with disability-related issues all the time, but couldn't understand that anxiety can be just as limiting or debilitating as any other disability.
Right, it sounds a little bit like they need a little disability awareness.
Well,
training.
absolutely, no question
There's a long
about
time
it.
ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think you had mentioned, it would make you more independent. There's varying levels of independence.
Sure.
You contacting the bus or going to a bus stop and getting on a bus and riding a bus, I don't do that. I mean, that's a level of independence that you found.
Right, true.
So that was
Very true.
that is equally as independent as getting in a car and go.
And if I don't belong behind the wheel of a car, I'm not going to play Russian roulette just to prove a point to somebody.
That's a great
Yeah,
point.
forget about it. That's
Yeah.
so.
I mean, just think about, in terms of other invisible disabilities, and we're not, we're by no means trying to educate people on what are all of the invisible disabilities,
Right,
because there are
right.
hundreds of them.
Sure.
But we all know somebody who has a visual or auditory disability.
Right.
Those are invisible disabilities. Unless somebody wears glasses, you see a hearing aid. For the most part, those are invisible. That will be your cue to know that. But a lot of times people aren't wearing those things.
Right.
So those are people who have some form of disability that prevents them from doing something in everyday life.
Sure. I had talked when we opened about, you wouldn't necessarily know someone who's deaf unless they were using sign language.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think to go back to the mental disabilities like, schizophrenia, bipolar, we have to move away from this idea that, they're like Martians or something, or they're violent, or, it just isn't true. People are on their medications.
Right. I think a lot of
just as functional as you and I.
Right. And I think a lot of times we get stuck in TV and movies.
Sure.
And there's been a lot of times in movies where you see somebody with schizophrenia who is the bad person.
Oh, yeah.
Who turns out to be the bad person. And like you said, we have to get away from that mode of thinking.
The labeling.
Because the labeling, that's a better way of putting it. Because that's not the true sense of things.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, they're all over the place. I think the older I get, and like I said earlier, the wiser I get, the more accepting I become.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to help people understand, is to be accepting of people and be accepting of disabilities, whether they're visible or invisible. Because really, when it comes down to it, people are people, and we're no different than anybody else who's walking around.
That's right. I think it's also critical in the world of like employment, where we see somebody who's not working. Well, why aren't you working? There's nothing wrong with you. You know, you can't necessarily jump to that conclusion. You don't know what's going on with the person.
No.
Maybe they have an invisible disability that prevents them from working full-time or part-time. You don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Employment's a tough thing because you don't want, somebody doesn't want to go into a job or start a job. Like you said, you don't want to drive because of the anxiety issue,
right,
where you fear you're unsafe behind the wheel.
Right.
Maybe somebody thinks, I can't do it. I can't stay with that job. I'm going to fail. If you always think you're going to fail, you know, sometimes you just don't do what you want to do.
Right. Or they're suffering from depression.
Right.
And they're just barely hanging on. You know, I have a good friend who had depression, well, still does, but has depression from a chemical imbalance.
Oh, geez.
And it's real easy to say, oh, come on, just snap out of it. Just come on. You know, everybody gets depressed and, you know, all those cliches. But that doesn't help a person who is suffering from real depression. You know,
right, it's easy to say, like if I feel depressed, it's easy for my friends to be like, come on, dude, let's go.
Well, sure.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Fine. Because they know me and they know what I've done.
Right.
And I always do.
Right.
I mean, like you said, everybody goes through a bout of depression on occasion.
Sure.
But the person who is constantly depressed is not snapping out of it.
Right.
And that affects their everyday life.
Not everybody who gets depressed needs medication for it.
Very true.
But the people who are on medication, they know what they're dealing with, you know, so.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's what it is. There's invisible disabilities out there. Just be aware of that and, you know, be accepting. That's my biggest thing. It's always been my biggest thing, is be accepting.
Just
for what they are.
Be careful when you know, it's very tempting to make judgments of people based on what you're seeing, but, you know, it could be the tip of the iceberg for all you know.
Absolutely.
So, all right.
Yeah, well, he's Rob.
I'm Rob. Oh, and he's Mike.
I am.
Yeah, that's right.
I am Mike. Until next time.
We will see you later.
Amen. Talk soon.